Scions of the Southland. Mr. Grant, Zoom tells me that we only have 40 minutes to record this episode. So where would you like to start?
Let's start with the ones we can kind of knock out pretty quick. That being golf and cross country. You may ask, we haven't heard anything about golf and cross country. Did they do anything this week? And the answer to that is no. But it is worth noting because golf is in Glencoe, Illinois, tomorrow and Tuesday at Northwestern's little invitational they got going. So yeah, definitely closer to this episode than our next one. In terms of things to know there, 14 teams, several of which were in the tournament last year. Northwestern, Cal Poly, us, Indiana, Kansas, Kent State, Marquette, Michigan State, North Florida, Notre Dame, Ohio State, South Florida, UC Davis, and Washington. Georgia Tech comes in as the hot off the heels of a Maui Jim Invitational win, and they are currently number 8 in the coaches poll, number 4 in the Sagarin Index, which is like the Sagarin Index for football, but for golf, if you know your obscure football advanced numbers. But
hey, now put some respect on one of the BCS's major computer polls. Thank you.
Fair enough, but he does do a lot of polls for computer type analytics for a lot of different sports. So check those out. It's cool that they do it for golf. I like advanced stats. In addition, we've got cross country next weekend in Fairburn at the Alexander A6 Invite. If you're in the neighborhood, check it out. I don't know too much more than that, but they'll be up that way, and they'll join the slate with the meat of the rest of this, that being volleyball and football.
Absolutely. So let's roll right into volleyball talk. This past week, which really was just Friday and earlier today, they went 6-0 in terms of sets and 2-0 in terms of games. They swept at Wake and they swept at VT. I have some notes because I got to watch the VT game a little bit earlier today. What did you have to think about the weekend overall? General thoughts?
We needed to win 2 games and we got 2 wins. And it's weird to say needed, but especially with how, I guess, thin the margins are to be in an ACC volleyball program without the, fail safe of the conference tournament, get some of that quality competition at the end of the year. It really is important to schedule well and take care of business. And we're in the take care of business part, right? It's going to get real quick here. And Wake and Virginia Tech, even though that was on the road, were 2 programs we definitely should be expecting to be at this point in our arc of our program development.
Mm-hmm. The note that I had on the VT game specifically, while I was watching, I think I jumped in at VT 11, Tech 5, and it was weird because the announcers had noted right after I jumped in that VT had come out hot out of the gate because they set up in an offensive formation, which is weird to think about when you're talking about volleyball, but nevertheless, they came out in an offensive formation of sorts that Tech was not prepared for. And so Collier had to burn a timeout really early, I think right around when it was VT 9, Tech 3 in the first set, and make some adjustments. But after those adjustments, that entire advantage that VT had started with was negated. It was a complete boat race the rest of the way. That match ended, or I guess that set ended 25-17, and then the other 2 sets 25-15 and then 25-13. And then for the Wake Forest game, that was 25-15, 25-21, and 28-26. So a little bit closer margins in that first conference clash than the second one, but really, for the most part, it's taking care of the business in the exact same way that they've been doing the entire year.
Yeah, and I mean, that's about to get real quick. Like I said, we get Notre Dame and Louisville up next, both in our building. Notre Dame will be on a Friday night at 7. So that'll be pretty good, I guess, precursor to your weekend, whatever that may be. And then Louisville, obviously, top 5 team, beat Nebraska. We unpacked all of that last week. But yeah, they're really good. It's good to see them. And Pitt carrying the water for the conference, and kind of a rising tide lifts all ships, right? If we can toss our name in the hat for one of those, top 10 type considerations, like a lot. Losses to these two teams do not ring in the same way that the dregs of the conference does. This is not a sport or a situation where, everyone's a quality loss. I'm going to be honest, like the bottom of the ACC, those hurt. And these are not bottom, but, at least 1-1, I think would be my hope on the weekend.
I mean, you're talking about a Notre Dame team that finished, I think, second in the conference last year. And then Louisville, obviously, I think it was the conference champ. So you're looking at a really tough test. And I mean, this is where the rubber meets the road. And I don't think we've actually said it outright. It sounds like we've been down on the, we've been at least not down, but at least neutral of the program. This is a very good volleyball team. Like, let's not beat around the bush about that. This is a very good volleyball team led by 3 frontline starters that all have their first or last names that start with B, which I now need you to come up with a witty nickname for on the spot.
3 Bs?
No, we can do better.
Killer Bees.
Yeah, but the Steelers use that one. That's the one that came to mind for me.
I don't know. Murder Hornets. I don't know. That doesn't have the B thing in it. I don't know.
Okay, well, we're going to workshop that one. But again, really good volleyball team. We've gone through the stats before, but as long as these 3 keep going, Bertolino, Bergman, and Brambilla, Tech is going to keep rolling. And that's the strategy, right? Versus Notre Dame and Louisville. Make sure that they can get going and they can stay hot. And it just comes down to execution there.
Yeah. I mean, you gotta execute if you're going to beat great teams. And, I'm not going to be down on the team. We have high expectations, but, I think it is also important to be at least a little bit of a realist to say, hey, like it's not like last week where you could say, all right, we expect 2 wins. No, play good. It's in our building. Hopefully that works in our favor and walk out with a win, and hopefully we're saying twice. So
absolutely. Let's move on to the other news of the weekend. Georgia Tech football beats UNC 45-22 at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the house that Matt Ryan built. I want to start with you first here, because I remember when we were talking about this while we were there, you had a couple of thoughts around the stadium and the atmosphere and sort of the series, the tone of the series overall. I mean, this is going to be a 5-year thing, right? 5 or 6 year thing. So let's start there.
Yeah. Obviously, like the elephant in the room is the place wasn't full even in the 2 decks that they sold. And you can spin it however you want. Say tickets got sold, but the butts weren't in the seats. You can say the student section was full, which we will circle back on, because that is an important indicator that I feel is probably at least a little bit more important than us as alum. But maybe that's just me being still a recent grad. You can spin it as, hey, like it was late, or I mean, at least speaking for myself, going to 4 games in 4 weeks in a row, plus another next week, that's exhausting. And a night game and logistics of being downtown, whatever. But when the crowd got loud, I don't know if it's because it was a dome or what, there's definitely energy. And again, we can talk about whether or not buying giant gold Georgia Tech tarps would have been worth it to block off the upper deck. I say no, considering I know we're playing Clemson there, I think 2 times in the next 3 years or something like that.
And one of those is, I think either one or both of those is a Chick-fil-A game that we do not control the entire stadium ticket allotment for.
Well, and this is, taking a left turn off of that. Honestly, I had this take when we played Tennessee there. Georgia Tech could own that Monday slot of the Chick-fil-A kickoff game. They'd sell more tickets than they did this year. Granted, I don't think Clemson is the right team to put in there. I mean, obviously Auburn is kind of like the golden goose there, but the Auburn, the Tennessee, the they're just interesting Tech matchup. I think that's the perfect use for this. But in terms of like proof of concept, I think you've shown it works. You've shown that you can get 6,000 or 7,000 students a mile down the road. And we can talk about more things like don't lock half of the gates of Central Park or Centennial Olympic Park.
That is a Freudian slip, my guy.
Yeah, oops. Whatever, it happens. Like there's all sorts of little nitpicky things. Obviously, the park thing is way out of what Tech and the stadium
Tech can control, right? That's a normal. I hesitate to say it's a good normal thing, but it's a normal thing for the park after games. But
the point is, downtown Atlanta was hopping. Akshay and I were at an establishment before, and it was full to the brim. A lot of Tech UNC types. A couple of people there to watch the Atlanta United game that were probably confused as to why the place was packed out when Atlanta United was on the road and it was a Saturday. But
that game was also horrible, but not an Atlanta United podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a different podcast. But yeah, in terms of high level, I didn't love the idea at first. I'm a big Bobby Dodd homer, but I'd say it went pretty well, especially when things started to go our way and the energy got up there. Like if there was 30,000 or 40,000, I would have known the difference. It sounded pretty electric to me, at least. And the band sounded good too. So that's always nice.
So let's see. The reported attendance was 37,450.
Yeah,
that
probably empty seats.
Yeah, the weird thing is that ESPN doesn't note, like ESPN doesn't put down that this is in the reduced capacity part of the arena. It still notes the capacity as 75,000. If you have the upper deck closed, so the third deck of the stadium closed, it's about 45,000 seats. So doing some rough napkin math here, that's about 83%.
Yeah.
83%.
Brain said.
Yeah. 83% is about where Tech has been at historically for the last couple years. So it's not really any different.
Yeah.
Even if you throw out the COVID year, it's not really any different. And I mean, we can talk about that as a problem because it is. But I think we wanted this episode to talk more about the game being good and like sort of the with the outcomes of the game and so some of the narratives of the game rather than some of these other concerns. But I think it's important that we talk about those off-field, quote unquote, off-field things as well.
And as we roll into that, I will tie a bow on the attendance commentary, noting again that North Carolina, not necessarily always our biggest sellout. The game in particular that came to mind thinking of that is 2017, which was only 42,000. That was our previous low water mark against them in the last decade, with us putting 50K in 2009 and then hovering between there and 42. And I guess we hit 50K again in 2015, but you get the idea. So it's a little bit less than we've seen at home traditionally. I presume that means maybe they not necessarily hit a target or something like that. It's still COVID. And again, all the stuff that we said, but moving on, I'm trying to think, how do we transition that into talking about the actual football game? So
you mentioned that this game was proof of concept for the idea of the stadium series, right? It proved that this model can work. I'm using air quotes, podcasting is a visual medium, can work for Georgia Tech over the next 5 or 6 years. So let's pivot from there. The high level narrative of this game, I think the high level narrative question is, does this victory and how it was achieved count as proof of concept for the Jeff Collins tenure?
I'm a homer. So take what I'm about to say with the noted Jake is usually the glass half full guy. I think, the only person on staff to predict we would win.
I want to see how close you were, so I'm going to pull that up.
I expected to be 2-2 after this game. They did it in a more exciting and I think future is bright kind of way. But It is a little bit frustrating to not be 3-1 or heck even 4-0. We've lost 2 games. We're 2-2, and we've lost by a total of 7 points. We've outgained our opponent, I believe, in all 4 contests. That is a tough pill to swallow. But in terms of doing good things 2 weeks in a row, hey, we actually kind of did that. I mean, that's some sort of proof of concept to me, at least.
Mm-hmm. So here's my thought on it, and I'll note real quick before I get into mine. Noted friend of the program, Split Zone Duo. I guess we can call them internet friends. They
reference
willing.
your site enough that we can call them friends, even if they probably don't know us that well.
Fair enough. They were willing to call this proof of concept. My thought, and I traditionally, as I've been the more cynical, or at least the more realistic guy out of the two of us, my thought is I think that NIU result, despite sort of the improbability of it, still stings, right? I think that still counts for something in terms of whether you're talking about, is this going to work long term? Because those are the model of games that you have to win. Those are the model of games that you have to have, that you have to win automatically, is a better way of putting it, right?
Yeah.
I think I agree with what you're saying when you say 2-2 is where we expect it to be. It's an unusual way to get there.
We did it the hard way.
There's a universe where the Tech is 3-1 with a loss to NIU and a win over Clemson and a win over UNC. There's a universe where Tech is 4-0 and potentially ranked with wins over Clemson and UNC.
Yep.
We can debate the alternate universes here till the cows come home. But I think my vibe check, to use a millennial term, on us through the quarter of the season is sort of, this is fine. It can be better. They have played like it can be better, especially as we're about to talk about. They have played better than that record. But in order to prove proof of concept, they have to string multiple productive offensive performances together.
It would be very nice right now to be halfway to a bowl. I think we'd be talking about it at least just a little bit different. But to dovetail from that and the expectations and stringing things together, I don't think that you can say that the defense in particular has not been stringing things together. And to their credit, last night was very fun to watch. Mm-hmm. I think 2019-ish and 2020, there's definitely a bit of like an eye roll and really talking about Minister of Mayhem and like attack and I get it, great slogans, but like last night it legitimately felt like every play there was some attempt, expectation, ability to pressure Sam Howell to put the ball down. I hate that phrase, but to get to the pocket, to attack it, to try and take offensive weapons out of the game. I think at least in terms of that, I'm pretty confident in the direction that is trending.
Yeah, and I think that's why I made sure to specify offensive production, right? Because the defense was the bit that we were sold on, right? The defense was the bit that everyone was like, okay, Collins comes in as a former defensive coordinator, a former defensive savant at Mississippi State, at Florida, and to an extent at Temple. The offense or the defense will be fine, but how does the team evolve, or how does the team transition away from the option, right? That's the overarching narrative of the tenure. That's why I'm specifying that offensive production. If you can string together if you can string together like 70 to 80% of the offensive production that Tech was able to put together in this game versus UNC next week and then the week after, I think you're talking about a very successful track moving forward. But the thing for me that I keep sticking to, and I think this is exacerbated by a couple of other results around the country, is I don't know how that Clemson loss looks at this stage. to a certain extent, even if you account for that Clemson defense. I think there's still some questions that can be answered or asked there about Clemson's offensive functionality, right?
Yeah.
And then at the same time, you have a couple of questions here and there out of those first two games, just about how much this offense can produce and then protect the quarterback. I think you have a couple of those things answered in this game, but you need to see that done consistently week in and week out. And right now we have a data point of 1 for the offense and a data point of 2 for the defense, or 2 data points for the defense.
Yeah.
So that's my thesis there.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I'm going to go a little bit gut feely here, and we can switch into numbers as we get into that. I forgot just how fun and electric Jeff Sims was when he was on fire last year. And he came into this game ready to, let's say, right the ship, if you will. Like, I thought, and for those of you who didn't watch or didn't know, Jordan Yates, effective, getting the ball towards the red zone, stalled down on a couple drives, settled for field goals. At one point, it was 7-6 UNC. So, translating a 7-0 UNC start into back-to-back field goals. Again, nice that we make those now. That's fun. I like that. But Jeff Sims coming in, he has an extra gear when he runs. You definitely saw that. I think it was on the 3rd touchdown because he was going away from us. But the guy can run. He found the end zone 3 times on the ground, 1 time through the air. I don't know. I don't want to, go from being, yes, Jordan Yates managed the game well, to being like, oh, nope, Jeff was the answer all along. So I don't think that's necessarily true. But I do think, like, for all this talk about them being like good pals and stuff, they were very complimentary yesterday. And I think they played to each other's strengths very well.
There's a joke to be made about red zone effectiveness for home teams in that stadium, but I'm going to avoid that one. Here's the thing. When we're talking about quarterback controversies, I think it was Paul that said a couple of years ago, actually, I don't think it was Paul, but there's a famous quote that's like, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none.
Yep.
I don't think, well, let me rephrase this. I don't necessarily think it's the same, or that's an issue here, because we're not cycling out quarterbacks every couple of drives like Paul did in one of those. I think it was in 2011 or 2012 with Vadley and Tevin Washington. It's not a situation like that. The debate here, and I have it in our notes, is that you're sort of going for high floor versus high ceiling, right? It's a risk reward. It's an opportunity cost analysis, for lack of a better term. And I think it's one of our writers, Nishant, noted this as well. Yates was moving the ball, but stalled out in the end zone. But then the staff rolls the dice that a more athletic quarterback in Sims can make plays to get in the end zone and find that last 5 yards, that last 10 yards. And that was a gamble that paid off, right?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting dilemma. Dilemma might be putting it a little more conflicty than I want to say, but it's an interesting concept here because you have 2 quarterbacks that can run the offense. It's sort of which tactic, which game plan do you want to go with on the given day? And I think in this case, in this situation, in this game state where you have to be aggressive versus a team that is potentially better than you, well, it is better than you in terms of talent to a certain extent, in terms of ranking and some of the star power, right?
Yep.
You have to roll the dice. You have to take some of those risks and you have to be aggressive in order to win. And so that's what they did. Just to talk about some of the numbers from Sims here, who had a really, really good day. And I think you stated that, but I really want to emphasize that he had a really, really good day after coming in towards the end of the second quarter, maybe the middle of the second quarter. Anyway, not important. Passing line, 10 of 13, 112 yards and 1 touchdown. He was averaging 0.63 expected points added per dropback, which is very, very, very good. ESPN had him at a 8.6 QBR, which is good enough for fourth in the nation for week 4, right behind Alabama's Bryce Young. So really, really good performance, but it got even better when we're talking about his ground game, right? 10 carries, 128 yards, and 3 TDs, good enough for 1.34 expected points added per rush.
And that means every time he touched the ball, it was roughly adding 4/3 of a point to our score, according to math, which
it's
is
math.
It's math. Believe the math. Trust the math. I will say again to highlight specific things. 10 for 13. There was one pass, wasn't intercepted, but it did get tipped. That still found its way into. I can't remember who.
I think it was McCollum. It's either McCollum or Carter. Okay, I don't know the pass.
I didn't know if it was Malachi about. Or Nate, but yeah, no. I think that was about as emblematic of the evening, particularly in terms of quarterback play as you can have, in that it didn't matter what he did or what the offense did. They found a way to make it work, in my opinion. And there's an argument to be said that the score should be higher. This is without us unboxing the phantom whistle called on Dante Smith on what would have turned a almost no yard gain into a touchdown from about midfield. So again, not even leaving points on the table in terms of like the offense. It was more just like this doesn't feel like their final form, Akshay. Like it feels like they still have more potential, which is wild.
It's good execution of a game plan that we've seen the pieces of in previous games. And I think the thing that we've said all along during the course of the season is that the offensive play calling is there. The plays, the scheme, all of that is there. It just depends on execution. It depends on finding the right receivers. It depends on the protections, right? And I think a lot of credit goes to the offensive line in this one, who kept the pocket mostly clean. And even when it wasn't clean, Sims and Yates, in their respective tenures during this game, were able to step up and either scramble pretty effectively, or they had designed run plays that took advantage of fooling the defense into a full-on pass rush, and then sneaking out through the center or out wide. And I think the scheme here, the tactics here, were really good for the situation at hand. Just a couple more quick notes on the offense as we move along. Dante Smith was really good in this one. He was I think he was the number 4 overall running back in PFF grades, either this week or overall in the nation right now. 0.24 EPA per rush. Not a lot of carries in this one. I think he only had 6. He only had 6, but a lot of important ones, I would say. Jordan Mason as well, 8 carries for 42 yards for 0.21 EPA per rush. So really, really good work there. Offensive line only allowed 1 sack. So that's really, really good, especially after they allowed 2 versus Kennesaw State. So I think it was 2 or 3 versus Kennesaw State. So there's consistent improvement there as well. Kyrick McGowan, I think we were giving him shout outs all night while we were doing the live tweeting. He had a really, really good game, but I don't think really the stats show it. He had 3 catches on 6 targets for 39 yards, but an EPA per play of 0.26. So a really good performance from him. A couple of other things as well. On early downs, so that's first and second down, Tech had a really, really good day, or night in this case. 23.5 EPA created on those plays, 0.47 on average. So that, again, really, really good execution. And then on rushing opportunities, so that's any gain over 4 yards, Tech usually added about 11 more on top of those gains. So we're talking about an offensive line that has had trouble with protection in recent weeks, but they were able to keep it solid. They were able to keep it steady. And then also running backs and quarterbacks for Georgia Tech were able to take those baseline level opportunities created by the line and turn those into big gains pretty consistently.
Yep.
Any other notes on the offense before we move on?
Not a ton. I thought the pass game looked good, both receivers and tight ends. Again, we talked about the quarterbacks, we talked running backs, offensive line. I really think that does it. I mean, I usually think points when I think offense, but we can talk about some of the kicking, punting, and kickoffs later on when we talk special teams.
Okay, so let's move on to the defense. And I think you mentioned it earlier. This was a really good performance. Again, I mean, you're talking about doing this versus the SP Plus third overall offense. They're now down to 6, but again, third overall offense going into this week. And it was a really, really, really good game from the defensive line, who caused the UNC protection scheme a whole lot of trouble in this one.
Yeah, and I think that's critical to note, is just how good of an offense that UNC graded out as. It's still a top 10 offense, and that's quite different from we held, commonly regarded as impotent Clemson offense to only 14 points. Well, when you hold a team that just hung almost 60 on Virginia last week to 22, I think then you can say that you're that repeatable success. Like they did it. More power to them.
Mm-hmm. I will note a couple more stats here. 22% havoc rate is what I got for the Georgia Tech defense, which is very, very good. That includes 8 sacks of Sam Howell, along with 3 fumbles of his own. UNC was stopped for a gain of 2 or fewer yards on 41% of its rushes. So a lot of work being done up front. There are some concerns here. I think we still do have to note those down. Howell was still able to throw for 300 plus yards. He had a really bad day at the office, but he still threw for 300 plus yards on this defense. And at one point during, I think it was the end of the third quarter, he took only 2 minutes off of the clock on a scoring drive for a touchdown. So the way that it seemed to me is that it's a lot of coverage sacks here. A couple of those were just bull rush, like really good line play. A couple of them were coverage sacks where Howell just had too much time to think. So there's still some room for improvement on that line play, getting the quarterback a little bit quicker. Another part is because Howell still has all that time. There were some issues with coverage in the secondary. I think when Tech dropped back into a zone, Howell was finding seams in sort of that 7 to 10 to 15 yard range of throws pretty consistently. It's just that he made bad tuck and run decisions. He made bad stay in the pocket decisions. And he just lost control of the football a lot. It was just not a good pocket passer performance from Sam Howell.
Yes, I agree. And in terms of talking about him, finding in the 7 to 10 and yard range and whatnot, again, I never played the game. People out there listening, if you disagree, let us know. We do like interacting about all this stuff. I think if you're going to be an effective defense, you have to be effective in multiple different looks. And I think we did do that a fair bit. And you know what? If he's finding and able to take advantage of one specific thing, great. I'd rather him find some success in picking apart our pass defense at least a little bit. But we were effective for the most part in stopping deep balls. We were effective, very effective in stopping the run, as noted earlier. Like there's always going to be something, right? And I think in terms of as a whole, you can probably say that Georgia Tech, be it, short passes, rush, deep balls, the effectiveness there and the looks they were getting, I think outweighed it, but that's also just my opinion. Also, I know counting stats, whatever, but 8 sacks and 3 fumbles forced and recovered. You can hang your hat on that right there. And your average Joe on the street's going to know that that's a pretty darn good day,
And that UNC offensive line is not having a good season whatsoever. I think on Split Zone Dude this morning, you saw Richard mention that progression is not linear when it comes to college football. And just because they returned a bunch of that talent from last year doesn't mean that they are getting better. right?
Yeah.
And I think we saw that come to roost both in the Virginia Tech game to start the year and then also in this one. So that's a concern for UNC there. Obviously, a strength for Georgia Tech, or something that Georgia Tech took well advantage of. I think another point there, and you're right about something being open for UNC. It might have been a tactical thing, leaving that 7 to 10 yard those 7 to 10 yard routes open, because like you said, Howell was having a lot of trouble hitting the deep ball. He only hit one of those really, really deep passes. He only showcased the arm one time in which he was actually accurate, and it was sort of a, throw the ball into a 2 foot wide bread box kind of moment in the end zone that we were sitting in, which is great for him, but also he only got one of those really, really good passes in. So I think if you're willing to play some of the deep ball coverage stuff a little bit tight and limit those chances, limit those explosive plays, and then also generate a good amount of pressure and limit the running game like Tech was able to do. Like you said, the losses, or I guess the leaving that middle part of the zone a little soft, is fine, because you're at least forcing them to move down the field a little bit more slowly.
Yeah. There's one other thing I was going to add on that. I can't really remember, but I'm sure it was wonderful and insightful. I will say it is worth re-emphasizing here. Sam Howell was widely considered to be, if not the best, one of the very best returning quarterbacks. And, maybe that's perception and hype. And I don't know. UNC certainly had a lot of love coming into the year, and it doesn't necessarily make them untalented what they put together here. But I don't think anyone saw this performance from this defense, even if it was very effective. How's that against this offense?
Yeah, I think I have here, it's unclear. I don't think you can say he's bad. He's definitely a good quarterback, right? He's definitely a talented quarterback. He's not terrible. I've seen some terrible quarterbacks. I watch the Falcons every week, believe me. And that's not Matt Ryan slander. That's more Daniel Jones slander, who they played today. But anyway, besides the point, I don't think you can say he's Heisman contender material like everyone was banging the drum for during the preseason. Everyone is a little extensive, but him and DJ from Clemson were the two top ACC quarterbacks, the two Heisman contending or playoff contending quarterbacks, and both of them have regressed this season so far. So it's an interesting time to be an ACC quarterback. I think it's kind of what we can say.
Well, and kind of dovetailing into that, I'm sure this kind of goes bigger picture than we usually focus on in the podcast in terms of talking about the rest of the conference. Everyone sees, and everyone being the media, et cetera, sees the ACC kind of eating itself alive or whatever, being competitive, being chaotic as, wow, look, this is proof that they're all terrible. But, I think it's good to have a lot of teams in the mix. I think it's good to have a competitive conference. I think it's made the product very compelling this year, top to bottom. I found myself interested in watching Boston College play Mizzou yesterday. Like, when does that ever happen? You know what I mean? But it draws eyes to the Wake Forests of the world, who has a very effective program and could very well get to 9-0 before facing a large test. You have NC State, who I guess is theoretically still unbeaten in ACC play. You have, Tech has a loss to Clemson, but I think the Battle of the Techs homecoming weekend is looming larger now than it was before. Obviously, we have to take care of business in the meantime with Pitt and Duke and I can't remember who else. Not important. UVA.
There's a bye in there, probably.
There is a bye on the 16th or the 23rd, but we do also play a football game somewhere in there.
Too far, looking too far ahead.
Like these are very far in advance, but sure you can say Howell or DJU are having down years, et cetera, whatever. Hey, Georgia Tech is the most interesting it's been since, in my humble opinion, since that UVA field goal sailed wide left at the end of 2018 to put us at 5-4, 6-4. Yeah, I think it made us bowl eligible.
That bar is low.
Hey, I'm just saying, we're in the mix. We're interesting. That's a good place to be. I mean, rip UNC, but
not my problem.
Not my problem either. I feel so bad for them.
So bad. Let's just go over the rankings real quick. FPI has Tech at 33rd. SP Plus has Tech at 62nd. It's anyone's guess as to the discrepancy. I'm not really sure. 77th offense, 42nd defense, and 91st special teams in SP Plus. Our friend Robert, our fellow writer Robert's Bindex has not been updated yet, so I don't have those numbers just on hand yet. Let's move forward in the time that we have allotted. Zoom hasn't kicked me out yet to talk about this next game versus Pitt. Pitt played a September homecoming game versus FCS University of New Hampshire yesterday and won by 70 points. I don't really think you can take anything away from that, right?
I mean, most people don't know that New Hampshire even has a football team, so I don't think this necessarily counts. It's homecoming. They were at home. They're playing an FCS team. The FCS team that is not in the, let's say, conventional collective conscious of your average football fan. I think perhaps looking at the rest of their schedule, maybe the Tennessee game is more revealing, but I mean, this was a Pitt team that very well could have come into our game next week undefeated, and they're not. So is the question, I think the question becomes, whose MAC loss is less of a fluke? That's where we got to start.
It's an interesting question because you have Pitt, who has played, here's Pitt's schedule so far. UMass beat UMass 51-7, beat Tennessee 41-34, lost to Western Michigan 44-41, beat New Hampshire 77-7. So they're 3-1, they're fourth in the Coastal, and heading to Atlanta for a showdown at noon, the best of all kickoff time slots. It's weird because you talk about that schedule and then you look at their SP Plus ranking and they're 21st in the nation, right? The offense is allegedly there on a per play basis, even when adjusting for opponent and adjusting for conference. The defense has always been there and the special teams have always been there. Those aren't problems that Pitt has ever had to worry about. So how do we set this up narratively? What are the high stakes for both Tech and Pitt in this game for you?
I mean, I get that. I guess Pitt technically is in the catbird seat for the Coastal, but I guess that neither of us really truly are. Again, that's super far out, but I think more than anything, this is going to be how does Tech, I mean, obviously we just beat a Coastal opponent last week, so it's probably a stupid comment, but like this is where it starts to need to become a pattern. I guess that we said that last week rather than it being a one-off. Like the Pitts of the world are teams with high floors and low ceilings. Mm-hmm. Georgia Tech right now feels like a team with a high ceiling and a low floor. And I figure that we've seen the floor in losing to a MAC team. Given that there are no MAC teams left on our schedule, we can't do that again.
Let's pump the brakes. I've seen the floor has been lower in previous years, but let's continue.
Anyways, my point is, we know Georgia Tech is talented. We know they're electric. They're going to be at home, all that fun stuff. They have momentum. How does that translate to a team that is led by Kenny Pickett, who was the quarterback when, VE Day happened in 1945 and has been at Pittsburgh ever since?
Deep pull. I'm impressed.
And I have lots of Kenny Pickett timeline jokes just in my back pocket waiting to go. But you can't ask for a more experienced fellow than Kenny Pickett. I think this will be his 4th time starting a game at Bobby Dodd Stadium. Do you know how bananas that is? That is crazy.
He's also a transfer, I think.
3 years in a row. So
let's find out. Kenny Pickett. Please vamp while I figure out where Kenny Pickett or what Kenny Pickett has done.
Again, the Narduzzi 7 years. People know what you're getting in Pat Narduzzi. The reason that people ask the very legitimate question of was last night proof of concept of the Jeff Collins shtick is because that's exactly the kind of credibility Narduzzi has that Collins doesn't. And we can start writing a lot into direction of program in terms of talk around it, but the talk is talk, right? So at some point it's going to have to translate. And I think we were this close last year to seeing some weird stuff happen in that Pitt game. And quite frankly, we did.
And some officiating nonsense. Let's be clear. Some absolute aberrant officiating nonsense.
And I think the reason, one of the things that like stuck with us, even though we lost the game, I'm going to speak collectively. Hopefully you agree. If not, feel free to say it. But in the whole handshake, brouhaha, whatever, we finally saw a side of Jeff Collins where it wasn't just here's the buzzwords. And the last couple of weeks, I don't usually listen to the pressers. I find them not that useful, and the language hasn't really changed. But like there seems to be more emotion. Like he believes what he's saying more, and like, haha, here's this thing. Like Clemson, like emotional game last night, emotional game, and a lot of like the phrasing hasn't changed that much, but it definitely rang true with me because like. It seemed like it actually worked. I know that sounds dumb to say, but I don't know. There's credibility in that coming along with it. And that's why I'm willing to say that last night was a proof of concept of what an effective Georgia Tech Jeff Collins team would look like. Even if this team isn't all the way there yet this year, I think that's the kind of games that we would be playing if we are to see, success in a year or 2 or 3 and build this up into hopefully something that stays a while. Because for all the flack and hard times and with like we want to see this program succeed, and we want to see this group of coaches and players succeed too. So
I think if you're gonna take it to the macro level, the shtick, the marketing speak, all that stuff was always gonna start grating if it didn't come with success. Right. So you sort of see it in a different light, a warmer light when the same spiel or a similar spiel comes with a win rather than a loss. It just so happens that a lot of those losses that he's given more shtick at have been egregious. Let's say the Citadel one, last year's Clemson one, and the NIU one. To name a few out of the ether here. But I will agree that he is starting to open up a bit when it comes to the shtick. And I think that's something that you need to do in year 3, right? When you're trying to prove proof of concept, you need to have a little bit more weight with what you're saying. And like you said, he's now had 2 games of potential proof of concept, or whatever you want to call it, and now he's able to sort of have more weight to the Mar speak, and it's showing in those press conferences. To sort of recenter on our Pitt preview here, I think this game is the deciding factor for that proof of concept, for me at least. Pitt has been that bugaboo team for not only Collins last year, but for Tech probably since I started. So like since 2015, you had those 2 Chris Blewett years that were awful, that were just late losses. And then Pat Narduzzi is just Pat Narduzzi, to put it politely. So this is a game that if you can win, and you can win cohesively, and you can win at home and not look awful doing so, like we refuse to turn this into a Big Ten game in order to win it. I think I would be able to stamp this with proof of concept in terms of offensive execution and defensive strength.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Also, I didn't see if Kenny Pickett came from somewhere else to wrap this back to where we came from.
He started at Pitt. The problem is that both of the quarterbacks that were in front of him transferred out. That's why I remember the transfer.
Ben DiNucci.
Ben DiNucci, noted NFL quarterback Ben DiNucci, and Max Brown, former USC quarterback. So Pickett started in 2017, 2018, 2019 was his junior year, 2020 was his senior year, and then obviously this is his COVID year. So, he's been there since VE day, like you said. Just a note down some of the projections here. SP Plus has Pitt by 8 points. Vegas has Pitt by 4. What are you looking for from this game? What are your signs of success beyond just the point total?
There are news outlets, I don't know if they're credible or not, I'm not familiar with Pitt's little world, that are calling Kenny Pickett the best college quarterback in America. If you can do what you did to Kenny Pickett, or to Sam Howell, to Kenny Pickett, that's, I think, my success, because it's the consistency. And that, I mean, we saw it even in flashes. I think we saw it a lot in the Louisville game last year, actually. But, we've seen it in flashes in the past. But if they can continue that kind of pressure, especially against a proven, calm, confident, poised Kenny Pickett, you can do that to anyone,
Mm-hmm. And I mean, calling Kenny Pickett the best quarterback in America works by some metrics, because he's played 2 games in which his team has averaged over 50 points. So,
but who are they playing? UMass and New Hampshire? You got to play somebody from this side of the Hudson before we start talking about that. Come on.
Look, I'm just justifying what they're saying with, if you look at the volume,
no, you're not wrong at all.
If you look at the volume, they're technically correct, which of course is the best kind of correct, but I digress. I think I agree on the consistency part defensively. But I'm also going to pivot that and talk about offensive consistency, right? You want to see a similar quarterback performance, but against a better defense, right? That Pitt defense, like we said, is the 29th ranked overall defense in SP Plus. And then you also want to see the same offensive line consistency. It was a really good offensive line performance. And also the play calling in spots was built to take the load off of the offensive line. You saw a lot of rollouts. You saw a lot of rollouts, a couple of bootlegs, a couple of sprint outs here and there. Keep doing that and keep taking that load off of the offensive line for having to pass protect for 2 or 3 or 4 seconds while receivers get open, and make your quarterback work a little less, or at least get a little less beaten up in the process. And I think that bodes for success for Georgia Tech in this game.
Yeah, I agree. Again, offensive line, quarterback, consistency. That's the name of the game.
Mm-hmm. All about consistency. Anything else before we wrap up? We are already 15 minutes over what Zoom told me I could record, but it's letting me record anyway. You have the floor.
Freedom. No, again, I do want to circle back. It's amazing what it feels like to walk out of a game and go feel satisfied, other than I expected to win that. Like, a lot of our games have been just hitting that expectation. It felt good to notch an upset. It's okay to enjoy these feelings and to savor it while they're here. We're not on the team. We don't have to worry about prepping. We're fans. We got 7 days to at least find some satisfaction in that. Let's see what else. If you're on the fence about going to the Pitt game, hopefully you're there, or at least, supporting in spirit. And I don't know what do you think is going to happen next week? What are your fresh off the presses predictions? We gonna win?
I don't offer hot takes, as we all know. I did see, if you're looking at tickets, I'm seeing SeatGeek has some at 29, which sounds a little high. I thought I saw some for 18. elsewhere in the stadium. I'm sure face value is probably around 20. So yeah, I mean, it'll be a nice day. Let's look at the weather forecast. Weather.com, Atlanta.
This is where we just need to have a professional meteorologist on staff.
I mean, you want to pay for that? Because
nope.
Woof. Saturday the 2nd, 81, high of 81, low of 60. So actually it'll be hot. It'll be toasty, but nice day for the most part.
We will live.
We will live. It is a noon kickoff. It is on the ACC network. Mr. Grant, thank you for joining me today. It is now 9:30 and we gotta go. Last word.
Yes. From the rumbleseat.com, from the rumbleseat@gmail.com, via email, FTRS blog on Twitter. I'm at Jake Grant 98 and Akshay doesn't advertise his. Feel free to tweet us, email us, leave a comment, subscribe, tell your friends. I don't know, all the YouTube stuff, to borrow a phrase. And yeah, go watch volleyball this week too. These can be a pair of great games. So should be a fun weekend.
Also, go talk someone's ear off about our blog like Jake did during the football game. That's always a good advertisement. We will see you next week.